Here we have a video all about sentence types which come under the category of writer's methods. The aim of this video is to give you 4 types of sentence which you should be able to easily spot if you have enough practice and revise them, and to give you also the sentences to help you think about the effects of them and perhaps what they tell you about the relationships and dynamics between characters in the extracts. So the aims of this video are to identify the 4 types of sentence, to give you lots of examples of each of them, so by the end you're confident in spotting them. And then towards the end of this video to apply these sentence types to a particular GCSE extract from a few years ago, which I've used in previous videos, to show you how you can use analysis of sentence types to give you an evaluation really of the dynamics and relationships between characters. So just to give you some context in this small introduction, many years ago I used to teach sentence types using simple, compound and complex, and I spent a lot of time teaching students these particular types of sentence, and I actually found over, I suppose, the experience of teaching that students found these not exactly very helpful in their analysis. They didn't really know how to find them. They certainly, when they were writing a story, didn't say to themselves, oh my god, I've got to use a compound sentence now. So I found that these terms were extra distractions. So a few years ago, I decided to change those 3 sentences to 4 alternative sentences. And the 4 that I use, which I'm going to show you in a second, I always find give students more to say in terms of the effects, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. So writer's methods is important. It includes 3 types of methods. They can be individual words, language techniques, and sentence types. And I have also found that knowing sentence types confidently is particularly useful for both question 4s, which some students find difficult to tie in the methods. So question 4 really is, I think, the question that this video will most help with. So here we have our 4 types of sentence. You might already be familiar with some of them. Students are often most familiar with imperative because they might have been taught it in past years for persuasive writing. I've given you there in the middle a definition, and in the right hand column 2 examples. So an imperative is a command or instruction. Interrogatives are questions that people ask each other. So when you ask a question, you're trying to get information out of them, so you're interrogating them. Declarative is a statement or fact or truth. It's how we learn information. And exclamative is you're looking for the punctuation mark of the exclamation mark to convey a mood or a particular tone of voice. And with the interrogatives as well, you're looking for, obviously, the question mark. So 2 of them, the punctuation can often be the clue. So those are the sentence types that we're going to be working with in this video and form the basis really of this tutorial. So let's start then by giving you some examples. So I want you to imagine that you walk into a bank because you want to open a bank account, and the manager says these things to you, the 4 statements there on the left. You can pause this video now and have a go at putting these sentences into the correct category on the right, and then I will give you the answers. So here we have the answers. You can tell we've got the question mark that somebody is asking a question, then it's going to be interrogative. We have got the imperative, open a bank account today, because it's an instruction. The exclamation mark tells us that the person saying this is probably a little bit excited, and the top sentence there is a statement of fact because they're making a statement. So those are the correct sentence types. Give you another example. Your school has an assembly where the teacher talks about bullying, and the message of the assembly is that bullying is a very, very bad thing, and the school is better without it. So again, have a go at putting these sentences into the correct category, and then you will be shown the answers. Here we are. So again, the top one is a declarative because it's a statement. The next one is imperative because it's a command, it's an instruction, something that we should do. The third is an yes is interrogative because it's asking us a question, and the teacher might be asking somebody specific. And the last one there is an exclamative because of the exclamation mark, but also because it's an important point that they might say a bit louder, and exclamation marks can often show an elevated volume of voice. Let's stay with the theme of school, and I want you to imagine that you overhear a conversation between a teacher and a badly behaved student in the corridor. The student has been misbehaving at lunchtime. And again, you can pause the video here and have a go at labelling all 10 sentence types. But as you're labelling as well, I want you to look at the purple circle there, bottom right. And I want you to now start asking follow-up questions like, how is the teacher presented? The teacher is saying all these statements. So how is the teacher presented by these type of sentences? And why do you think the teacher is using these types of sentences? What are they? How are they being presented? How do they want to be seen by the student? So we're starting now to move away from just labelling the sentence types to thinking about the dynamic and the relationship that these two speakers will have. So you can pause the video now, have a go at putting them into the correct category, and then we will talk also in a minute about the answers and what it tells us about the relationship between these two people. So here we have our sentence types, and good old PowerPoint doesn't recognise the word exclamative, but here we have the sentence types. Again, I'm not going to go through them in much detail because you can see we've got the same trend as previous slides, the same jobs as we saw before. So again, you can hopefully see now why these sentences are the types that they are. But in order to push it even further, I want to actually use P, and I know in other videos I've talked about how I don't actually like P because it can be a bit restrictive in students' expression. But I'm going to use it in this example because it breaks down the analysis quite well. So I want you to imagine that this conversation between these two people, the teacher and the student, is part of your extract. And you notice that there is a particular use of sentence types as a method, and you want to talk about how that conveys a character because the question asks you about the presentation of a particular character. Question 4, paper 1, tends to be very character driven a lot of the time. It's usually about people in the extract and relationships between people and how we view them. So I want you to imagine that those sentences are part of the extract. So you start by saying, the sentence types used by the teacher when speaking to the badly behaved student shows a difference in power between speakers. The evidence is conveyed through the repetition of interrogatives. How dare you speak to a member of staff like that? How dare you? As well as the imperative, stand there and be quiet. This suggests that the teacher feels he has more authority in this conversation because that his language reinforces his dominance over the student. He is questioning the student quickly to seek answers, as well as ordering the student to follow commands. This shows his annoyance and lack of patience. As a result, the teacher's sentence types convey the asymmetry in power between speakers and the teacher's sense of authority and frustration. So asymmetry means kind of an imbalance, a difference. They're not equal. This reminds me of an old coursework module that used to be taught for the English language. We used to have to analyse a transcript, a conversation between two speakers. It was really quite interesting, and it's a shame that we don't do that anymore. That was one of my favourite modules to teach, actually, back in the day. But you can see here that imagine you have a question which is all about the presentation of the teacher. For paper 1, question 4, the question might be, a student said, the teacher is presented as authoritative and strict. To what extent do you agree? And you notice that the sentence types really convey that. So that's really what is being said here. You're talking about how the choice of sentence types that the teacher uses says something about the power dynamic between them. And obviously, as you would expect, adults in a school, teachers in a school, tend to have more authority than students. So that is an example of how you might want to use sentence types in order to think about dynamics between characters. Now I want to turn to the Hartop extract. And again, I want you to imagine that basically the question for paper 1, question 4 for this paper is, Hartop is a cruel and hard man. to what extent do you agree? And it's all about Alice getting out of the van, finding the flowers in the road, coming back to the van, and this is the interaction between her father Hartop and Alice, the daughter. When she reached the van, Mrs. Hartop said, "What was it?" "Only a bunch of chrysanthemums." Hartop himself appeared at the very moment she was speaking. "Only," he said, "only? What do you mean by only, eh?" Alice stood mute. Then Hartop raised his voice. "Well, don't just stand there. Do something. Go on. Go on. Go and see who wants a bunch of chrysanthemums. Move yourself." Alice obeyed at once. She picked up the flowers, walked away, and vanished, all without a word. So now, if you remember, paper 1 question 4 is all about the end of the extract, usually the second half of it. Usually around line 20 onwards is approximately where it always is. And at the end of the extract, there always tends to be a conversation between characters or an interaction between characters in a lot of the extracts. So the sentence types can help you understand the relationship between characters, like we did before a minute ago with the teacher and the student. So again, you can pause the video now and label what sentence types these are. Don't highlight everything. You don't need to highlight everything. Just highlight what you regard to be the most significant sentences, and in relation to the task, obviously. And also start to think about how the sentence types convey Hartop's character. We're being asked about him being cruel and hard and strict and quite authoritative and commanding as the father figure. How do the sentence types prove that he is those things? And then we'll discuss some possible points. So, as we know, I love colour coding. Colour coding keeps things clear. And you can see I've been selective. I haven't coloured the whole thing in because technically all of these sentences is a sentence type. So obviously you can't talk about every single sentence because there'll be hundreds in the extract. You just need to be very selective. So we have an interrogative in yellow, lots of questions because he's trying to kind of get answers out of her. We've got exclamatives in green because he's almost shouting. We've got imperatives in blue because he's ordering her to do something. And we have the declarative to show Alice's reaction. So all of these sentence types are relevant to the question. AQA and any exam board's kind of rhetoric with English is always answer the question. They don't like it when students go off on tangents. So everything you should say should be relevant to the question there under that red line at the top. It's a focused 20-minute task. It needs to be relevant to the task. So all the sentences that I've highlighted here are relevant to that task. So let's think about what this means. So obviously, when you interrogate somebody, you ask them lots of questions quite quickly. It means you think you have more power than them. You're trying to get information out of them. A bit like how maybe a lawyer might interrogate a witness in a courtroom. The lawyer has more power than the witness, usually. That's how it's perceived anyway. So there is this feeling of it's your right to almost to ask them lots of questions. It says something about the power dynamic between father and daughter here, doesn't it? We've then got the shouting, and that in itself, to shout at somebody means you are commanding and quite strict, maybe. It says you demand to be heard. And often people that shout of other people believe they're more superior than the person they're shouting at. You've then got the imperatives, again, commanding somebody to do something because you feel you have the legitimacy in doing so. The reason why your teacher might say to you, Harold, can you go and get those books? The reason they're doing that is because you're the student, they're the teacher. They believe they can do that. They can get their students to do jobs for them. So, it says something about the power dynamic. And then we have the declarative about her reaction. The fact that she obeyed at once suggests that she feels perhaps quite threatened. She doesn't speak. She just gets her head down, which suggests that maybe she's frightened of her father because of his personality. So these sentence types are relevant to our question. Let's now think about, again, putting this into a P paragraph. So reminding us that the question is all about Hartop and his strict persona. You start paper 1 question 4 often with I strongly agree or I partly agree. I strongly agree that Hartop is presented as cruel and harsh towards his daughter Alice, and his strict personality is reinforced by the sentence types seen in his dialogue. So here you've noticed that the sentence types are a particularly useful method in terms of how the writer conveys meaning to you. It's one of the bullet points under question 4, if you remember. Then the student selects their evidence. For example, upon returning to the van with the flowers, Hartop speaks to Alice using repetition of interrogatives, only, what do you mean by only, A, and mixture of exclamatives and imperatives, such as move yourself and do something. So we've picked our evidence. Importantly, we now have to explain. So this suggests that Hartop is using his dialogue with Alice to reinforce his power and authority because he is her father. He feels he has every right to talk to her bluntly and in a way that could be seen as nasty and bullying. Perhaps he feels children should be inferior to and respect their parents. The sentence types emphasise his frustration with Alice's words that the flowers were unimportant, when Hartop sees the flowers as a way to support his family and earn a modest living. As a result, readers could view Hartop as harsh and cruel because of the authoritative and unfriendly manner in which he is speaking. The fact Alice obeyed at once suggests she is threatened by him, and we may feel sympathy for her in this situation. So that is how, again, an example of how you would use sentence types as a means of analysis and a way to understand the dynamics and relationships between characters. So this is a paper 1 question 4 response. It's really, I think, the most likely question that you will use this sentence types for, but maybe also question 4 in paper 2 as well, comparing viewpoints. So in summary then, I have always said to students that it's really important to go into the exam knowing these 4 sentence types because they are going to be in your extract for sure. So it's a method that you can fall back on. And I find that they're better than simple, compound and complex because they actually tell us a little bit more, they hint a little bit more at how characters are presented and the dynamics and relationships between characters. So that is the video all about sentence types as a writer's method.